Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly epic. An absolute cinematic narrative pulled straight from 10 massive, deep dive sources detailing the sacred history of ancient anomalies. If you've ever stared at massive ancient monuments or heard these wild stories of sudden, unexplainable leaps in human civilization and just thought, how on earth did this happen? Well, you are in the right place. We're going to unpack a fascinating framework that totally upends the mainstream narrative, and we're relying entirely on the textual, archaeological, and biological records laid out in our source material. Let's set the stage here with the foundational tone that our sources explicitly demand we use. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That single sentence right there from Genesis, that's the absolute bedrock of the history we're unpacking today. According to the scholarly texts we're reviewing, if you want to understand the origins of humanity, ancient architecture, or frankly any supernatural occurrences, you have to start with a created, structured order, not some random, chaotic universe. Which leads us to the ultimate question we'll be tackling. Were our ancestors visited by beings from distant stars or fallen angels from beyond the firmament? For decades, popular culture has been totally obsessed with the ancient astronaut theory, right? This idea that extraterrestrials seeded our planet. But our sources argue this is a monumental misidentification. They're proposing humanity wasn't visited by aliens, but rather something far more profound and honestly terrifying happened involving fallen angelic beings. So, to really grasp this history, we first need to understand the cosmology. Section 1, Creation of the Firmament, the biblical cosmological structure. The crucial takeaway here is that ancient texts don't actually describe beings crossing infinite outer space. Instead, they describe a literal downward descent through very specific layers of a firmament. As outlined by authors like Zen Garcia in our sources, you really have to picture an enclosed cosmological system. Think of a flat terrestrial plane covered by a massive, vaulted dome. So when these ancient texts talk about entities coming from the heavens, they are not talking about spaceships traveling light years. They're talking about a vertical descent from higher created realms straight down into ours. It's a massive paradigm shift when you really stop and think about it. And that brings us to the actual historical event that secular theories often get entirely wrong. Section 2, Descent of the Watchers, the Angelic Rebellion. Check out this timeline. It brilliantly illustrates the really tragic yet majestic arc of angelic rebellion that completely corrupted the early Earth. Following the creation during the antediluvian, or pre-flood era, a very specific group of 200 entities known as the Watchers descended to Mount Hermon, and this essentially kicked off an era of transgression, categorized by the transmission of forbidden knowledge, which then leads right into the days of Noah and a massive biological corruption. According to sources like the extra-canonical Book of Enoch and Joseph Lumpkin's deep dive analysis, these Watchers were divine beings. They were originally stationed to observe and oversee humanity. But as this quote from Jude clearly lays out, they abandoned their assigned heavenly stewardship. They didn't just observe, they interfered. They crossed a hard boundary established by the Creator. Now, what's incredibly fascinating here is that this sudden transmission of advanced knowledge is the exact thing modern theorists mistake for extraterrestrial instruction. You've got Azazel teaching the arts of war and metallurgy, Samjaza teaching sorcery, Kokabel teaching astronomy. Our sources argue that when secular historians look back and see this sudden, totally inexplicable leap in human civilization, they just assume, well, aliens must have handed over the blueprints. But the ancient texts are highly, highly specific. This was forbidden angelic instruction, given to humanity completely outside of God's ordained timing. But this forbidden intervention didn't just stop at knowledge. It actually became a physical reality. Section 3, the Nephilim biological corruption, the hybrid offspring. Our sources, including scholars like Gary Wayne and Ryan Pitterson, detail that this forbidden union produced the Nephilim, genuine, literal, biological hybrid entities. The texts explicitly state that these sons of God, the Watchers, took human wives. So the offspring of this union weren't just tall humans, They were a completely corrupted biological hybrid. These were the giants, the mighty men of renown, and they represented a direct spiritual and physical attack on the human bloodline. And our sources point out that biological evidence completely refutes the whole alien genetic engineering idea, showing instead a created genome that suffered targeted angelic corruption. Dr. Nathaniel Jansen's research in his book Traced explains that human DNA actually traces back to one original created pair. On top of that, the genetic diversity we see today perfectly matches a massive genetic bottleneck, Noah's flood, diverging straight from Noah's 3 sons. There is literally zero biological evidence of aliens seeding our DNA. Rather, the flood was a necessary biological reset to cleanse that Nephilim corruption. So what did these beings leave behind? Let's look at the massive anomalies found all over the globe. Section 4, Megaliths of the Giants, Architecture of the Fallen. The sheer physical size and supernatural strength of the Nephilim actually explain the construction capabilities that normal human physiology simply could not pull off. Think about it. When the Israelites explored Canaan, they reported seeing beings so massive they felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Our sources argue these were not myths. These were literal accounts of post-flood giant descendants who possessed the physical power to manipulate the massive stone blocks that still completely baffle modern engineers today. So we're not looking at alien landing pads here. We are looking at the products of giant builders using forbidden geometry under that enclosed cosmological system we talked about earlier. When you look at Baalbek, the Egyptian pyramids, or Göbekli Tepe, you're seeing the combined result of Watcher-transmitted intellect and Nephilim physical strength. It perfectly explains how these mathematically precise, insanely heavy stone structures were erected all over the world, while our modern engineers are still scratching their heads trying to figure out how to do it with our biggest hydraulic cranes. Now, you might be wondering, okay, if there were giants walking around, where are all the bones? Well, our sources highlight a really intriguing mystery. Physical evidence of these giants has been systematically hidden to protect modern evolutionary narratives. According to researcher Richard J. Dewhurst, institutions like the Smithsonian have historically suppressed and hidden discoveries of giant skeletal remains across North America. Because admitting these bones exist, that would validate the biblical record and completely collapse the prevailing evolutionary and ancient astronaut timelines. And it goes even further. Even the Tower of Babel, as researcher Bodhi Hodge points out, was a cosmological project using Watcher knowledge to physically breach the firmament layers. It wasn't just about building a really tall skyscraper. Under that enclosed firmament cosmology, Babel was an occult, post-flood attempt to build a literal gateway right into the heavenly realm, utilizing the forbidden structural knowledge passed down from antediluvian times. Finally, we absolutely have to look at how this ancient history has been repackaged for the modern world. Section 5, The Ancient Astronaut Deception, a Cosmologically Displaced Lie. This brilliantly illustrates this stark contrast here. The extraterrestrial theory is simply a secularized, displaced retelling of Genesis 6. Caspian Sargentson and other authors in our sources make a great point. To make the alien theory work, you first have to completely change the cosmology to an infinite heliocentric universe. Once you remove the enclosed firmament, well, fallen angels descending from the dome suddenly get rebranded as aliens traveling through outer space. By reframing demons and fallen angels as our benevolent space-traveling creators, the modern theory is essentially an attempt to erase the creator entirely from history. You see, the ancient astronaut theorists aren't entirely wrong when they look at these anomalies and say, humans didn't do this alone. Their critical error, according to the textual record, is that they catastrophically misidentify the source. They take genuine supernatural historical events, completely strip away the divine judgment, and replace God with unnamed beings from some distant galaxy. And our sources warn that this theory isn't just harmless fun. It is actively conditioning humanity to accept a coming cosmic delusion under the guise of an alien return. I mean, look around. We're seeing a normalization of genetic manipulation, a resurgence of open occultism and mystery religions, and governments are slowly dripping out UFO disclosures. Scripture says the end times will be as the days of Noah, and our sources argue that the world is being perfectly primed to welcome back these fallen entities, completely mistaking them for our enlightened alien creators.
So I'm going to leave you with this incredibly chilling thought to ponder. As global powers prepare for UFO disclosure, are we being primed to welcome extraterrestrial creators or the final deceptive return of the Watchers? If our sources are correct, the greatest deception in human history isn't about little green men in flying saucers. It is a cosmic, spiritual rebellion hiding in plain sight. Thank you so much for joining this explainer of our sacred history. Keep asking those hard questions and keep seeking the truth.